From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. We are delighted to have as our guest today Virginia Delegate Bob Marshall, who is someone I greatly admire and prize as a friend. Years ago, 35 years ago in particular, Bob Marshall worked with me when I was director of the United States Office of Economic Opportunity. And I remember, Bob, that you played a key role in targeting the way in which the Great Society was funding the abortion movement, and you did your bit to stop it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, until I was working at your agency, I really was not familiar with these kind of grants. I mean, directly. I knew government gave money out, but I was not aware of the mechanics. And I saw all these groups called Planned Parenthood, which is a misnomer if there ever was one.
Murder Incorporated is a more appropriate name.
Planned Parenthood, maybe, but not Parenthood. And they were out here pushing these programs that were wrecking families. The girls got more times pregnant, not less. There were more people on welfare after this, and these were programs that were supposed to prevent all this. And so you had us review these programs, and we found valid reasons to defund these efforts.
And you did a great job.
Well, thank you. It's only because somebody was at the top who was willing to say no that people like me could do the research and give you reasons to say no.
And if there were times when a reason couldn't be developed, somehow those grants got lost.
You know, that happened with the Rand Corporation grant, and I think this was an effort, believe me. It was a $9 million grant that they were going to get to model all these permutations on national health insurance. I frankly think this was for one of Teddy Kennedy's perennial presidential runs. And I had a friend of mine who actually worked at the Pentagon who could have done the same work for about $167,000 just using the existing federal programs, because they had all the benefit structures that Rand wanted to have with this experiment. So, yeah, we had a good time causing great anxiety for the Great Society.
You did a fabulous job, and I'm very thankful that you were there with us. Right now, Bob, you're running for the United States Senate. This interview we're doing may not be broadcast until after the Republican nominating convention has been held, although we're going to try to make it available to you and others so that people can see it before the convention. I don't know whether you're going to win. You don't know whether you're going to win. But you're running an extraordinary campaign. You've exceeded all expectations. You're doing very, very well. And you may wind up being the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate from Virginia. Tell us about your campaign.
Well, I had no plans of running for the U.S. Senate ever in my life. But the last 5 or 6 weeks when I was running for delegate last year, my re-election, the ninth one.
9 re-elections.
9, right.
That's great.
A lady came up to me and she said, you ought to run for the U.S. Senate. And I looked, so are you talking to me? But she said, yes, I am. So, and then I had other people, professional people and young people, middle-aged, seniors, everybody. I talked to my wife. I said, I'm getting all these people asking me to run for the Senate. She says, well, you've got to win delegate first, but don't say anything to anybody. If people keep asking you, then we'll consider it. Because, I certainly wouldn't do anything like this without consulting Kathy. And that many people did ask me how. And finally, a guy in a auto repair store came up to me and said his name was Ken. He lived about 55 miles south of me. He wanted to know, was I going to run for the U.S. Senate? And almost before I could answer, another gentleman in the store identified himself as a retired policeman who lived in Prince William, also asked me the same question. I said, you know what? Someone's trying to get my attention. Maybe I should pay attention to this.
Now, this is not an accident that people want you to be their U.S. Senator. You've had some extraordinary victories in the House, and one of the reasons you've been so successful as a delegate, getting reelected in what was once a very difficult district,
yes,
is that you bring to your job knowledge, humility, good humor, and high principle. I remember one day I was on the floor of the legislature with you talking about some legislative strategy issue, and up in the balcony there was a woman being introduced whose daughter had supposedly been the victim of a botched abortion. And that was really not the true story. And right in mid-sentence, you jumped up and said, that is not true. Here's the real story.
That's
right. And it totally transformed the way in which she was received and what was done.
Right.
And that was typical Bob Marshall.
Well, I'm not going to let that pass without objection. I just won't. God gives me certain gifts, and I better use them because there will be an accounting one day of the talents I have, and if I hide them, I'm in big trouble, Howie.
You won a major victory yesterday, not yesterday, but recently, in terms of defending the high principle that only elected officials should have the authority to raise taxes. Tell us about that.
Last year, in 2007, the legislature, supported by overwhelming majorities, like 85 people in the House, 29 in the Senate, the governor, the speaker, the attorney general, you name it, they were for it. But what it did was it set up two taxing authorities, one in Northern Virginia and one in Hampton Roads area. But everybody was appointed to this. Some people were elected to other offices, but nobody was directly elected to this office. And I said, you can't do this. You're not supposed to be able to do this under our form of government. I mean, we fought, we were shooting British precisely for the same principle in 1776. And I kept asking questions and got no satisfactory answers from anybody. And in fact, the speaker didn't call on anybody to oppose this because he wanted no dissent on this. So what I did the day of the veto session, I asked to speak during the point of personal privilege, which is not connected directly to the debate. So he just does this as a matter of course. Then I laid my arguments out against this thing, and people can see it if they want to on YouTube. And I said, there's no authority in the Constitution to do this. One person says it's a local tax. Someone else says it's a state tax. What is it? You can't. This is some hybrid that's unknown to our way of government. Besides, unelected people can't do this. Well, there were guffaws and laughter, and people thought I was Don Quixote in front of a firing squad. I said, fine, I'll do this. And they came up here in Northern Virginia a couple months later, and the local body that was appointed attempted to impose these taxes. I say attempted because it was an invalid action. I was watching this rape of the Constitution right in front of my eyes. I thought, I can't believe this. I was so incensed. I went out and I found two very wealthy individuals, explained to them the principle that was at stake here, and they agreed to help fund this case. And I previously found the attorney, Pat McSweeney, who used to chair the Republican Party of Virginia.
A wonderful man.
Excellent attorney. And I became the lead challenger against this. Now, the interesting thing is, this was called a bond validation suit, which means that anybody who lived in Northern Virginia was legally eligible to challenge this contention that they could raise these taxes. This is a little bit arcane, but interestingly, Mark Warner, Democrat running for Senate, lives up here. Jim Gilmore, the Republican running for Senate, also lives up here. Both of these folks are lawyers. Neither of them raised a finger, yet they both were out here preparing to run for a United States Senate and should have had the interest of the people at heart, especially when you see some untested, untried tax that's going to raise billions of dollars imposed on Virginians. And Howie, this wasn't the only tax that was out there. There would have been authorities for sports events, for pollution, for schools, all kind of nice things, but all violating the principle of taxation only with representation. So we filed the suit. We lost up here in Arlington. And I knew something was up because the judge should have recused himself because his house was in an area that could potentially have been taken. He should have bowed out and we get a judge from, Danville, Virginia, who wouldn't be directly threatened by this. He didn't do it. We kept pressing ahead. On the last day of February of this year, I walked in the assembly. Didn't know what happened. I won the case, 7-0, not 4-3, 5-2, 6-1, 7-0. And they said for us to do this, and the beautiful thing was, it was an appointee of Democrat Governor Tim Kaine who delivered the decision. So, and he was in the process of being confirmed while the case was being heard. So this was a very delicate, circumstance. And it undid this whole so-called transportation compromise. Well, you know what, Howie? And I actually got the money for the case at the same time I was up for re-election. But the principle of no taxation without representation is more important than Bob Marshall's re-election. I got money from these gentlemen later, but I had to get money for the case first. So that I put the citizens before my own self-interest.
We have to take a break now, Bob.
Sure.
But when we come back, I'd like you to explain how someone who is so principled, so much a constitutionalist, and so conservative can win election after election after election in a district which the Washington Post once labeled a liberal Democrat district. We'll be back right after these messages.
Sure.
Stay with us, and Delegate Bob Marshall, possibly the next U.S. Senator from Virginia, will still be here. There are many conservative organizations, but the Conservative Caucus is unique in that our standard for evaluating public policy is the Constitution of the United States. Our goal is to advocate policies which conform to what the Constitution stipulates and to oppose those which undermine the Constitution. It's clear that the federal government has only those powers which are provided in the Constitution, which were initially delegated by the states to the federal government or which were subsequently added by amendment. If we adhered to that principle, your taxes would be lower and your liberties would be more secure.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
There is a better way to have fun with history. Visit americaslibrary.gov. Log on, play around, learn something.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, and our special guest is Delegate Bob Marshall, who's running for the United States Senate from Virginia against two governors, Democrat Governor Mark Warner and Republican Governor Jim Gilmore. Bob, what are some of the issues against Gilmore?
Well, he is for legal abortion for 8 weeks. I think you should protect the right to life from conception.
It used to be 12 weeks.
Well, that was last year. Now this year it's 8 weeks. But he also is on the board of a company that makes the morning after pill. He gets $12,500.
He gets paid $12,500
every meeting
to serve the only U.S. company
that
makes the morning after pill.
That's correct.
The other one is in Red China.
That's correct. Well, right.
Others.
Right. Then, in 2001, a UPI story, September 4th, he came out for amnesty for illegals, so much so that former Senator Phil Gramm criticized him and says, you might as well put a neon sign up on the border, say, come on here any way you can, we'll make you legal.
By the way, you've been a fighter against amnesty for illegals.
Oh, I got the law passed that sets up the Commission on Immigration in Virginia to look at this, yes, so that is
He's
correct.
also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes, he is. And if you look at the website, Jim Gilmore's website, I just assumed automatically he was against amnesty. But Howie, it doesn't say anything about amnesty for illegals on his website. And I found that very curious. He also, in 2000, when we were dealing with the effects of NAFTA, I guess, which Congress ratified a couple years before.
Well, they didn't ratify it.
Well, no,
they voted for it.
They voted for it. You're right. It's a vote, and they should have been a treaty, but it shouldn't have been anything. But anyway,
and he was a supporter of NAFTA.
Well, several thousand people, at least, that I know of, lost their jobs in textile industry. I mean, more than that, but around Martinsville and Henry County. No fault of their own. They're good workers. They're doing their job well. They've got families. NAFTA takes capital and jobs out of the country. They lose their job. Gilmore did not want to let these folks have extended unemployment. I voted to give it to them. He voted to take it out of the budget. So tell me how he can get any blue-collar workers, the same blue-collar workers that Ronald Reagan got when he won for presidency twice. He can't do it. I can do it. Now, I was not planning to run for the U.S. Senate. And then in December 2001, 2002, he took every dime of the sales and use tax, which state law slates to be spent on transportation $652.8 million and shoved it into other programs. We had to put it back. So he doesn't think you should keep your word on, if I tell the public we're going to raise taxes for transportation, spend it for transportation.
When did you first run for the legislature?
1991.
What motivated you to run?
Actually, I tried to find some other sucker to do this. I did not want to do it. I wanted to find someone who was conservative, who held family values, and who would run for office, who was situated to run and had experience. I kept going around. I found people, but nobody matched it until my wife said, well, maybe you want to do it. And like I said, there were people with same values, but not the background or experience
Sounds like
or the
you have a
opportunity.
pretty good wife.
She's a nice lady. And so then I won. And every year, I've normally been outspent significantly, but I've never been out-volunteered. And I have an ability, because I used to be a Democrat, mea culpa. Sorry, it happens to everybody.
I ran as a Democrat for the U.S. Senate.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. The McGovern convention convinced me I was not a Democrat, and also convinced me I was not on the same planet with these people. But anyway, I just find civic concerns that kind of transcend Democrat and Republican. And so when I work on these things, a lot of people, well, they don't care what I do about the right to life or the marriage amendment. They say, fine, you got me a stop sign here, or you try to prevent these big tower lines from coming to my...
But one of the reasons you have so many volunteers is that there is no one who is more pro-life or pro-marriage in the Virginia government than Bob Marshall.
Look, I oppose my own leadership. Let me tell you what happened. Last year I had a bill in the Privilege and Elections Committee which said that right to life begins at conception and should be recognized in Article 1 of the Virginia Constitution. This was a prelude to a challenge to Roe. The last day of the P&E Committee, the chairman says, anybody want to make a motion? I thought, yeah, I moved to report my bill. Now, there were no hearings on it because it wasn't my subcommittee. And we had this fight going back and forth. It kept getting tied on these procedural moves. Finally, there's only one vote to make, the motion to report. 3 Republicans ran for the door faster than they were in Olympic trials. Not enough, however. I got a vote of 8-7, and I won, so they had to come back. I had the vote, and I called my friends. I said, call up your delegates and try to get lobbying for this. I was going down to Richmond. It was a Saturday, and this lady called me. She said, Bob, the vote is not on the Internet. I said, what do you mean? She said, it's not there. I said, well, I called my son.
Not on the schedule.
It's not posted, and you're supposed to post the vote. It's a recorded vote, and you have to report it. My son said, Dad, it's not on the Internet. So I called the deputy clerk, and I said, what's going on? He said, we were ordered not to put it on. I said, well, let me tell you what. You tell the leadership there, I will crucify them much worse than I ever did to Tom Moss, the Democrat, every day as long as I'm here. And moreover, if the vote's not posted by the time I get there in an hour and 10 minutes, I'll bring the assembly to a complete halt because I know how to do it with the parliamentary rules. When I got there, they posted it.
It's important to learn the rules.
It's important to learn. I went
That's
back.
what Jesse Helms did.
I went back to the 1780s read all these old journals to get the rules down. The next day, I went to Brian Moran, who's a pro-choice Catholic Democrat.
Brother of the congressman.
Brother of the congressman. I said, Brian, will you help me with something? He said, what is it? I said, it's abortion. He said, oh, Bob, you know I'm going to hell on that. I said, Brian, I know you're going to hell, but before you go to hell, I want you to help me get some Republicans to go to the board. He kind of got a smile. He said, are they ducking things again? I said, yes. So I said, all I want you to do is get me a record vote on this when this happens tomorrow. He said, I'll talk to the Democrat caucus. We had this fight on the floor. Again,
So you were able to build coalitions.
I built coalitions, that's right, for his reasons and my reasons. And the Republicans were about to get this thing off the floor without a record vote. And I said, recorded vote. Only 2 or 3 people on the Republican side put their hand up. When they got to the Democrat side, all these Democrats were there like with their hands up, swearing before a jury, looking like Cheshire cats, demanding a record vote. I got the record vote. And this was like 45-53. Howie, this is the first time this principle has ever been voted on since Roe versus Wade. So what I do, I just make these odd alliances that maybe other people couldn't think of or don't know how to make, and I managed to stay in office that way.
And have you had difficult re-election fights?
Oh, yeah. Listen, a guy 2 times ago, he probably outspent me 3-1, but I still beat him because I had more volunteers.
Gilmore's outspending you 10-1. That's
all right. I got more people working harder, longer, making more phone calls. This is my main brochure. My website is bobmarshall2008.com. My son's put it together. There's the bumper.
I've got 4 of these on my car.
You probably won't get stopped. So, at least they'll see you if someone's going to run into you. No, I'm very excited about this. Even the Washington Post says this race is much closer than you could think of.
And you know, what's amazing is that these left-wing journalists
Yes.
can't do anything but praise you for your intelligence, for your wit, for your sociability, for your graciousness. You get a very good press from the left because you show respect to people.
Yes, I do. I don't respect ideas. I respect people, because ideas you either agree with or you don't agree with or you try to understand. I got the Washington Post writer said, I'm the last great crusader in the General Assembly. Now, that's kind of interesting from the Washington Post. So in the Virginian pilots talking about this race being close, CQ said it's close. So this is very interesting.
Frankly, I'm amazed at how well you're doing.
It's
I'm delighted, but I'm also amazed.
Since January 9th, we started, and Gilmore was in this race much before that. But he's got a very high negatives, and I just don't think he can make it.
Well, he started running for president. He dropped out of that. Chairman of the RNC. He had a big fight with the White House.
Right.
Dropped out of that.
Right.
Was involved in the terrorism committee. Basically got kicked out of that.
Right. So he's here now for governor again. I mean for Senate. I just don't think he's going to be able to make it. And the fact that a state delegate can cause him this much trouble this far into this race tells me he doesn't have a grip on what's going on.
Well, it's a great tribute to you that your candidacy is being taken so seriously and is being treated with such respect. We're having this conversation before the convention,
Sure.
and neither of us knows what happens. But I pray that God will favor your labors. Whatever the vote is at the convention, you've performed an extraordinarily important service by being a candidate. And should you be the nominee, even though you'd be rated the underdog, I think there's a very good chance you'll be elected to the U.S. Senate. Stay with us. We'll be back for some parting words from Bob Marshall after these messages. We'll be right back. The very first clause in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, immediately following the preamble, asserts that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative powers, that means you cannot give other entities the power to legislate, not the United Nations or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund or the federal judiciary or regulatory agencies or federally funded private organizations. If you're going to stick to the Constitution, only the Congress can make policy, and the Conservative Caucus works to assure that Congress will more nearly conform to the Constitution.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper, and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, Chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable, which is now on the air in 120-plus communities all over America. And if you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, please check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. If you want to be on our mailing list, fax us your name and address. 703-281-4108 is our fax number, or drop us a note at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. Now, if you've been watching this broadcast, you know that Bob Marshall is quite a guy. And whatever happens in his race for the U.S. Senate, you need to watch him and follow his career. He's doing some extraordinary things as an elected official in Virginia. There's no doubt that he is the outstanding constitutional conservative elected official in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And you need to be on his mailing list. You need to follow what he's doing. Bob, how can they get on your list?
Well, if they go to the website, this is www.bobmarshall2008.com. You can see all the issues that I've, talked about. There's information about, emails and everything like that. And, contact me, and I will be in touch with you.
That's great. Now, tell us some more about your career in the legislature, your campaign, and tell us what you would do if you were a United States Senator.
Bring a few things to halt up there. Force votes that everybody would be ducking. I would certainly make them decide on whether or not they want to give out-of-state power companies eminent domain authority to come into any state without consulting their state corporation commission.
So you're a private property advocate.
An eminent domain is the last resort for serving the public good and shouldn't be the first one.
Very dangerous. The Kelo case was a disaster.
Absolutely. We have to, and recently a Pentagon report found $295 billion, GAO, $295 billion in cost overruns. That's bigger than the federal budget was in the late 1960s.
Whom do you most admire in Congress today?
I'd like to work with Senator Coburn.
Tom Coburn of Oklahoma.
Right.
A very good man.
Right. I hope I get there. It's curious about this race. It's everybody. The politicos think it's going to be Mark Warner, Jim Gilmore. Except I'm closing in on the side here. As a matter of fact, a sheriff told me at a conference, told me and my wife 2 weeks ago. He asked Governor Warner, former Governor Warner, "Who's your opponent?" Warner put his hands like this, looked up and said, "I hope it's Jim Gilmore. He does not want to run against me." Even state delegates who are Democrats told me, Mark Warner does not want to run against you. Because I know how to debate these folks. I'm a little bit faster on the draw than these guys are. And I'll draw them out to points where they don't want to go and make them look silly with their own principles. So,
well, you've been able to provide heroic leadership in defense of the right to life, in defense of marriage, in defense of the taxpayer. And I have no doubt that should God favor your effort and put you in the U.S. Senate, that you'll be one of the greatest senators in the history of the country. Bob, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
And I wish you every success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please join us for the next edition of Conservative Roundtable.